Hello, everyone, and welcome to this independent media broadcast. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Theodor Carp. He's our science correspondent here at Actionable Truth Media. And we're going to talk about several topics, but mainly around immunology and vaccinology. So, just before we start, Theo, maybe tell us a little bit about your background, like your scientific background, what research you're involved in, what topics specifically are of interest to you and things like that.
So, as my colleague has said, my name is Theodor Carp, and I am a graduate in biomedical sciences from the University of Essex in Britain. And I have been working particularly in the past 6 months with new scientific literature, and I have also contributed to peer-reviewed papers with subjects in immunology and infectious diseases with medium and high mortality rates. And I particularly cover the importance of including natural immunity in the efforts of vaccinology and perhaps updating the domain of vaccinology with a wider inclusion and attention to natural immunity.
Okay, all right. That sounds quite complex and very interesting. So I guess just to get us started, maybe just a little bit of a introduction to the audience. So when you talk about natural immunity, what exactly do you mean by that, and why do you think it's so important to protect human health?
Well, I'm going to start with defining, the two main departments of human immunity, the natural or the innate immune system and the adaptive or acquired immune system. Initially, well, the natural immune system is um, the set of immune responses and immune elements that produce responses that are non-specific and broad. And the adaptive immune system produces immune responses uh, that are specific to certain pathogens, and the recognition is not that broad automatically because they target pathogens with specific information. Initially, it was
Okay.
believed Initially, it was believed that adaptive immunity is the only department of the immune system that has a memory, meaning that it takes on energy of information to memorize about specific pathogens and specific patterns of pathogens. But now, as we discover more and more information about how pathogens first infect cells and first become distributed within tissues and beyond, specifically how there are receptors that detect certain patterns of pathogens, and these are part of natural immunity. Now, it is very safe to say that it is also the innate or the natural immune system that has a memory. And it seems to me that this part is more important in the sense of foundation than adaptive immunity, although adaptive immunity is central and the natural immune system is peripheral, if we can call it like that. But in life, sometimes the periphery is the foundation and is more important ultimately.
What exactly do you mean by like peripheral? So like in that context.
Well, peripheral has a visual imagination
Okay.
actually, of the two departments of immunity, if that makes sense.
Okay. hmm So just to make sure that I understand you correctly. So I guess natural immunity is something that is not specific to like a pathogen or like a disease or a virus or something like that. And adaptive is something that is specific, or is that's something else completely?
This was the classical way of defining the immune responses of both departments. But now it seems like
Okay.
the definitions kind of cross because once the receptors of natural immunity They call them pattern recognition receptors. They recognize certain patterns of pathogens. It could be any pathogens, but the types do differ on each genetic material, RNA or DNA or so on. It kind of seems to me that they sort of cross in a way. And that's why now it is believed that there is such thing as natural immune memory. Because if we have a memory, then if we have something about specificity automatically. But obviously, different ways of doing
it. So is there a link between natural and adaptive immunity? So how did these two kind of work together, and do they influence each other?
They do influence each other. They're interdependent, and at the same time, the natural immune system is the one that starts everything. Without a natural immune system activation, you won't have an adaptive immune activation, basically. Or if you will have, you have something that is defective.
So if someone is immunocompromised or their natural immunity is deficient for whatever reason, okay, I mean, would that also impact the adaptive immunity?
Yes.
So the adaptive immunity would kind of not fire, is that right?
It will fire, but it will fire in the wrong directions, in exacerbating ways. Like either too much or too little.
And that can cause damage to the body, potentially?
Yes, that can cause a lot of damage to the body. Because basically, people have hyperinflammation or hypoinflammation, and the virus will just be able to spread because the adaptive immune system will be less capable of targeting it, basically.
So when they talk about things like an autoimmune disease, is that related to that? So that's basically like natural immunity is deficient, and then adaptive immunity responds in a strange way or not in an accurate way?
Essentially, it can be a factor, yes, because autoimmunity is basically, for some reason, the immune system is made to be defective in a way of firing against itself. So it can be a factor, yes, just like powerful diseases can be a factor of autoimmunity. And I think this is the reason why we need to discuss about, everything in immunity, to kind of review the importance of each immune compartment. So then we will be able to build up the right solutions to problems.
Okay. All right. So I guess, when we talk about that, I guess in the context of the last, obviously the last couple of years, and especially the last 2 years with all the COVID-19 injections that, they were marketed as vaccines, but obviously were not. Yeah. So if they, so there's a lot of, talk about these injections basically causing people to be immunocompromised or have autoimmune diseases and stuff like that. So, in that context, what specifically is being damaged in people? Like, what is it actually doing in the human body?
So,
from your perspective,
it's a little bit complex here, because initially scientists they thought that using the spike glycoprotein would be ideal, or it would be the best way to train the immune system to learn about the virus and essentially produce the right responses when the virus actually enters. But what we found out throughout the years of this pandemic, some people call it different way because they don't believe it was a pandemic, and I understand why.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, basically this protein, this spike protein, is not just viral protein. It looks like it's a super antigen because it can damage so many departments of the human body, so many systems of organs. It's not just the respiratory system, it is essentially the circulatory system. That's what it seems to target the most. But it targets other other systems like the gastrointestinal tract, the digestive system, the nervous system, it was found out to essentially break through the blood-brain barrier and start causing damage in the neuronal networks that are important. And some people found out they couldn't use their muscles anymore the way they did before because certain neuromuscular junctions were damaged as a result of the side effects caused by the spike protein. And
Yeah, can you explain that? Sorry, Theo, can you explain a little bit what it means? So, like, we hear a lot this term being kind of mentioned. So, is it called the blood-brain barrier? Is that what you said?
yeah, so the blood-brain
What
barrier
does that,
makes the link.
what does that actually mean?
So the blood-brain barrier makes the link between the circulatory system and the nervous system, and it separates the two systems. So basically, the nervous system is protected from any factors in the blood that are harmful to them, to the nervous system. But it seems like the
Okay.
spike protein is contributing to the weakening and breaking of certain spots in the blood-brain barrier, causing, entering in the nervous system and even causing further damage there. So it doesn't stop damaging the blood. It doesn't stop with the damages in the blood. It goes beyond and starts damaging somewhere else. And this is very concerning, honestly. But the fact that they didn't talk about it in the media or even in the social networks, they wouldn't talk about this is honestly concerning with regards to the state of democracy, essentially.
Has that ever happened before? Like, has there ever been a vaccine or like any other, I guess, drug or medical treatment that later on has been shown to breach that barrier, that blood-brain barrier? Or is
I'm
that
not
like
sure about
that you
that.
know?
I'm not sure about that. In a few isolated cases, yes, but
Mhm.
there have been isolated cases. This is widespread. It's happening in not just in many cases, like more than before, but also it seems like it's not discriminating a lot in age. Like it
Right.
seems to happen more in immunocompromised people, but
Mm.
unfortunately, like it's happened in young people, young and healthy people with no underlying health conditions. So it really is not discriminating a lot, is it? And
Well, it doesn't seem like it. I mean, if you look at the mortality rates all over the world, I mean, it seems to be going up across all age groups. If anything, I would say the younger seems like there's a bigger spike there. I mean, that's what we see.
yeah,
So yeah, it is very concerning. I agree with you. So I guess what I'm trying to understand. So I mean, officially, like when the mRNA products were first rolled out, it was kind of like the way that they've explained it, like in the media, in like the simple terms, was basically that these products will stimulate your body to actually make the pathogen that causes that, and
yeah.
then that will trigger the immune response within the body against that pathogen that the body itself created, and that will create, I guess, that immune response will create like long-term immunity. Has that ever been done before? Like, I'm just trying to understand, has there ever been a
No.
vaccine or any, I guess, medical device or medical drug or anything like that that basically introduces the pathogen into the body for which it's supposed to protect against? I mean, I'm just not aware. Are you familiar
Um,
with anything like that?
Well, it happened before but it happened with different contexts and in different ways. So before they would use killed pathogens or highly inactivated pathogens that would have a different type of
Yeah.
genetic material to, to stimulate the production of immune memory. But that's a different way. This is an mRNA.
Yeah, I mean,
So mRNAs
that seems to be like the classic.
mRNAs are
Yeah,
active
sorry.
RNAs. The mRNAs to
Yeah.
produce proteins, right? With
Yep.
inactivated or killed pathogens, their RNA is essentially dead. It rarely produces any sort of protein, but that protein is also inactive. This is an mRNA, Michael. mRNA is active. It's like alive, if we could call it like that. It's a deadly protein, essentially, because that protein will be as active as when the healthy virus produces it. That's number one. Number two, it's essentially stimulating the body, the like its own amino acids to join together in certain fashions to produce that spike protein. So it's essentially training a healthy body to produce a bioweapon-like structure. It's never seen this ever before. And this is the most dangerous thing that ever happened. And the fact that people are not talking about this, it looks like it's a conditioning, social conditioning, psychological conditioning that we've never seen before. It's very concerning.
Yeah.
And it's also autoimmunity as well, because you're essentially like telling the human body to kill like something that was produced by the human body. So that would favor the production of autoimmune reactions. And that's why people say, oh, it's long COVID. Long COVID is autoimmune response. They'll say, oh, the virus does the same. But these people, now you've got milder disease. That means a lower probability that you will get these autoimmune reactions called long COVID. But the fact that now people tend to get more of this, it shows that it's no longer because of the illness, really, but it's because of the injection.
Right. So it's basically, it really has nothing to do with the virus or whatever that is. It basically has everything to do with the spike protein that entered the body, not because of someone getting infected with COVID, but actually because of the injection itself.
Yeah.
Would that be right?
And the mRNA. The mRNA also, it's another topic of discussion, because not only we found out in 2021, like late 2020, early 2021, that the mRNA is recognized by line 1 reverse transcriptases or HIV-1 reverse transcriptases. This does not happen with other RNA viruses or RNA components, which only indicates that it has fragments from HIV, which means that this was from the lab, the virus. And the spike protein was also part of that lab leaked virus. Automatically shows that, most likely it has some HIV fragments. And the more concerning part is the genetic part, because once you get more RNA nucleotides reverse transcribed and made into DNA, then that newly synthesized DNA will only go into the nucleus and join the cellular genes. And just so we understand, there are various genes in the human body with various functions, but some of these genes, they function in cancer protection. Many of them do, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a frame shift mutation, what is a frame shift mutation? When one of these DNA nucleotides pops up into the DNA that encodes the cancer gene, you got a frame shift mutation, meaning that the frame of the message, the genetic message, is completely changed. This is because the genetic message is made of codons. Codons are made of 3 nucleotides. You add 1 nucleotide, the message is changed, because from that point, it doesn't count as 3 anymore. It counts as a different message. It's a very long topic of discussion, but I hope people got my idea. This is not a joke.
Yeah, so I think I've seen a few people like mention that online. So basically, it's basically like reading a line and then it just skips a line because it doesn't know that like it needs to like move to the next one. So something basically like, I mean, would it be accurate to say it's almost like the stop sign has been removed and then it just keeps going?
Yeah, this also can happen because you get a stop codon. No, this actually is the opposite because you can get a stop codon, a new codon because it gets changed, and then the message is much shorter, and that protein no longer functions. It's a defective protein, meaning that once a healthy anti-cancer gene becomes non-functional, then the body becomes more exposed to cancer. There's a higher risk of developing cancer. And this is especially concerning for people with family history of cancer and genetic illnesses.
Yep. Okay, so one of I guess another one of the most common claims that originally kind of the establishment or the public health authorities made about this product or injection is that initially, like, yes, it creates the spike protein, but then it's only temporary, and it, first of all, it doesn't move to any other like organs of the body, and then it just kind of disappears. And now we know that potentially this stays in the body for much longer and potentially even becomes like a permanent part of a person's DNA. Like, is that possible?
Well, essentially it is, what I've just described is the mRNA becoming distributed. And the reason why it's distributed is because they made it to be more resistant to damages from the environment, from the tissues, the fluids that we have in the body. But they designed it to be that way. I'm not sure if they intended for that mRNA to be distributed or just merely to be more resistant, so it goes into a few more cells locally and produce a few more spike protein copies. So there's a memory against the virus, essentially, because you can't produce an immune memory against one spike protein copy. That's impossible. So they wanted to produce a few more from like hundreds or a few thousand. But there's no middle line that you can reach with this. There's no balance that you can reach with this, because this essentially is like a bioweapon. And when you have a bioweapon like structure, you cannot control how much you will replicate. That's almost out of the question. And they didn't take that into consideration, the origins of this virus. They thought it was just natural, that it just came from back, from pangolins, some jurisdiction, So by that mindset, they already found themselves in the wrong, but without knowing. So that's why they acted like this was all natural. That it was like a worse flu. That's the irony, because they acted like this was like a normal flu almost, but they locked us all down for 2 years. Like, I don't understand the extent of cognitive dissonance that these people had is astounding.
Yeah, and the flu itself disappeared during those 2 years, and now it's back. I mean, it's just like you can't make this stuff up. But I guess what I'm curious, so if let's say if we're saying that potentially this mRNA instructions gets encoded and then becomes part of a person's DNA, is it possible that that person can theoretically continue making like spike protein like forever?
No, this is more complex, because it's very rare if it can ever happen that for a whole gene to be inserted. No, we're talking about small portions of that gene, like 0.5 to 1% of that gene being taken out and placed into the DNA. So it's not going to be like, it's not going to produce a spike protein. The RNA is going to produce it, because the RNA is designed to last. But what they found out is that the RNA of the vaccine lasted for even a month or further. So RNA was still present 30 days after the vaccine.
Yeah.
Of course, if we talk about the other so-called vaccines, the adenovirus 5, adenovirus 26, which is AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson, well, that's a different story, because the spike protein gene is made to enter into the DNA of the cell because they want that cell to die. So it produces a spike protein from the DNA, and the whole cell dies. But it could be even more dangerous, slightly, because
Okay. Wow.
you're gonna have the gene of the spike protein inserted into the DNA of host cells, and that could not be controlled because, again, we're talking about spike protein. Well, they say that, oh, it's just gonna be a few cells. It's not gonna be a lot. I'm not sure about the genetic level, but the protein level of things. Well, once you produce more spike proteins, it could be dangerous. And they thought that it was a natural thing, a natural virus. And maybe they thought, oh, let's get this into the genes of more cells, more human cells. That's dangerous. Again.
Okay, so this is potentially really explosive what you're saying, because I mean, and I kind of thought always, and that's what was like even a lot in the independent media, they mentioned that, like, the main danger is in the mRNA product. So, like, your Pfizer's, your Moderna's.
Well, honestly, like the way I'm thinking it seems like the RNA is the main problem. The RNA vaccines, one, because it's distributed, like it's been given in the population mostly. You only got fewer cases of people receiving the AstraZeneca or Johnson. And yeah, I don't know the degree
Look,
of.
I mean, in Australia, a lot of people got AstraZeneca because there was even like local manufacturing here of AstraZeneca, and especially when the rollout started, the government didn't have access to a supply of Pfizer, and they did have access to AstraZeneca. So a lot of people got AstraZeneca, and like I remember the marketing at the time was saying that, like, AstraZeneca is like a viral vector vaccine. It's much more
That's the gene therapy vaccine, by the way.
So that's again?
That's the gene therapy vaccine.
So that is the gene therapy vaccine. So viral vector is still gene therapy, just like mRNA.
That's the gene therapy, yeah. That's what it told us. I was studying this in my uni, and they told us that adenoviral vaccines are gene therapy. But when we said that on the platforms, it was conspiracy theory.
So you were told that in class, but when you go and say that online, wow, that is ridiculous. So hold on. So that is also
that would be told to us by authorities. But when I was in class, I would be said, and I would be shown that the adenovirus vaccines are gene therapy.
Gene therapy.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's quite profound, because there's a lot of talk about the mRNA, but not a lot of talk about, like, the viral vector. So these are also, like, new technologies. Have they ever been used before, like the viral vector or the virus vaccine?
Well, they were used, but in other cases. I think they were used for other diseases like rabies. But again,
okay,
they're talking about proteins, just proteins. They're not talking about viruses. That proteins basically that do not cause disease. They're just proteins that are meant to be recognized by the human body. Because in rabies, for example, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's no such thing as adenovirus but you have a gene. You have the genetic material of an adenovirus, and they change some portions, and they add a recombinant gene that codes for the glycoprotein in this case. That's the protein that helps the rabies virus reproduce and infect. And they produce this glycoprotein, so when it gets synthesized, it can be recognized by the human immune cells, destroyed, and then there's an immune memory against that protein. And when that virus comes, the body recognizes the virus because the virus produces the glycoprotein. So it's a different story. That is a protein that does not cause disease. you know.
Yeah. So
It
I think maybe
helps the disease grow, but it doesn't produce disease itself. The spike protein produces disease and can kill. That's the difference.
so. Is it possible that one of the reasons why they were able to get away with like saying that like this is no gene therapy is basically the fact that like with the mRNA your body actually like your cells make the spike protein because there's like obviously instructions on how to make it, and then the body makes it, and then supposedly it produces an immune response against that same pathogen that it created, right? So that's mRNA. But with the vector vaccine or the adenovirus vaccine, as you call it, so
That goes to
the
your
pathogen is
DNA.
actually already entered inside a virus, right? So the body doesn't make it itself.
The body produces it because the adenovirus goes into the DNA, and then the DNA of
Oh,
the host cell, the DNA of the human cell, produces the spike protein, and then the cell dies.
wow. This is crazy. So I guess wow. It's like I just always thought like even up until now and that's most of the literature even that I read, they're all saying about like the dangers of mRNA and all that sort of stuff. Even like Mike Eden and all obviously all the experts in that area, they're saying how dangerous that is, and it is. But I guess people neglect to mention the fact that like a lot of people in many countries, Australia probably being the best example, I think the UK as well, a lot of people got AstraZeneca, that it's actually not less dangerous, maybe even more dangerous.
It could be even more dangerous, but importantly, we need to mention that with the mRNA vaccines, that mRNA distributes even in a less controlled manner. Because you find even after 30 days, you find a lot of parts of the body still with present mRNA.
Yep.
And with
Yep.
AstraZeneca, I think it's a little bit shorter. But it's like
Mm.
you said, there's no comparison. There's no
Wow.
degree of comparison here.
So I guess that kind of leads me to the next question, and I guess we obviously have a very very big problem with everything to do with vaccines or like whatever it's called vaccines now. This entire I guess term vaccines is now, I think, it's very tainted. I'm like I can say for myself, someone who's I've always taken all the vaccines and
Me
childhood
too.
vaccines, and I've taken a lot of vaccines when I needed to go traveling, yellow fever, typhoid, things like that. But now, like for example, for me personally, I can say I'll never take anything ever, no matter what, like nothing, not even tetanus shot, nothing. Obviously not flu, no nothing. And I think there's a lot of people like me, whether they've received the COVID-19 injection or not, they're like very hesitant to take anything that is marketed as a vaccine or can be interpreted as or basically anything that involves injecting stuff into your body. So that's obviously potentially can be a big crisis for for the human species. So what do you think we can do about it? Is there room for vaccines going forward, or do we basically need to completely abandon that paradigm and maybe create some kind of an alternative solution to maybe, I don't know, stimulate natural immunity or something along those lines? What do you think?
Well, I would say that the term vaccines is becoming more and more irrelevant by the day. And this is because of the lack of interest of like head researchers, to actually solve problems without further creating other problems. And
Hmm.
now, you've got human intelligence and you've got microbial intelligence. And what it seems to me is that now the present tools that vaccinology is presenting are no longer relevant to the stage of microbial intelligence. Because we're talking about genetic beings. All these viruses, the dangerous viruses, they have a genetic intelligence, you know, and a genetic motility. And
So what does that mean? That means that what technically they can think for themselves. What does that
well,
mean?
they have a genetic material. They produce
Mhm.
any sort of proteins. They could produce this life-threatening protein causing disease. So it's it can be in any way, but what especially happens with increased viral intelligence is they tend to suppress natural immunity the most. Because when they suppress natural immunity, that's when the adaptive immune system is hijacked, indirectly but seriously, sometimes in a life-threatening manner. So it's not a joke. For example, viruses now they produce all sorts of proteins, and these proteins they make receptors like pattern recognition receptors no longer function well, no longer recognize the patterns on the viruses, and then the virus can enter like it's just the genetic material of the host body of my own body. The virus is detected as its own, and then it starts reproducing in a less controlled way. And if this happens in the first stages, this can be dangerous because this is how the asymptomatic process happens. There's an asymptomatic time, but when it's asymptomatic that is prolonged, that's when we are getting into trouble because the virus is reproducing like crazy, but the immune system is not reacting to it because there's no activity of the immune system. The immune system acts like nothing is happening. Yeah. But that's because the virus produces the responses, the signals to silence the immune system. And that's the natural immune system that is being silenced. And that's why it's irrelevant with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you think all these vaccines that have been around for like decades, like, all the classic ones, I mean, I don't know, chicken pox and tetanus shots and the ones that have been around for a long time. I mean, do you think they are safe or they need to be looked at again with the knowledge that we have now?
Well, they weren't perfect either. People would accept them as every piece of medicine has to have a little bit of risk. If the benefit is greater than the risk, then it's okay to bring it to the market. That's the principle that people went by to accept these vaccines. So I would say they were necessary, but the principle in medicine is first do no harm. That's first. It's not second. It's not, it's the first step.
Yeah.
And I think there is place for better in the domain of vaccinology. That there could be vaccines that are based on natural immunity, that they do not need to have genetic information of any viruses, that even they do not need to be injected into the deltoid muscle in the upper arm. They could be nasal drops that could be administered a few times, or they could be administered once every season and offer protection even against really life-threatening illnesses. Of course, this does not apply for all diseases. For example, in rabies is the most complicated disease because you get an incubation period of up to a year with no symptoms. But once people get the symptoms, they die. There's no cure. So that's the complicated part. And that's where they say, oh, okay, we need to create vaccines even if they're not perfect because they're going to save lives. So I understand this perspective, but again, there is place for the better here as well. And I've been working on a paper to develop a vaccine or an immunizing process that merges natural immunity activation with adaptive immunity activation. And if you merge all the components of the immune system necessary to produce an effective vaccine, then you probably won't need to get the pathogen-derived molecule. to directly train the immune system to fight it. What you need to do, what you could need to do, is simply to stimulate the immune system to find it out all about itself. Because this is about learning. The immune system has an intelligence like our brain has.
Mm-hmm.
And what you need to do is you need to stimulate the immune system to learn alone about the virus. And at the same time, you need to help the immune system learn it safely without deaths. So it goes both ways.
So how does it work, I guess, in practical terms, without getting too technical? So like, in your paper, so instead of like injecting a pathogen or genetic material of a pathogen, you basically, what do you do instead, like to stimulate that immune response?
I think the final objective of updating vaccinology, it could take probably hundreds of years, to be completely honest. It's very complicated. Is you help the immune system learn without getting exposed to any information about a virus whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we continue to offer direct information to the immune system about a virus, eventually in hundreds of years from today, you're going to get viruses that will hijack the immune system like in a way that no vaccine like this would ever work. So all these known vaccines will no longer be 1% effective because these viruses will continue to evolve and they will completely gain control over the natural immune system. What I admire about a few vaccines, the classical vaccines, is the BCG vaccine, if you heard about it. So that vaccine stimulates the innate immune system. So that apparently gets the best stimulator of the natural or innate immune system, which shows that maybe we just need to directly work with the natural immune system instead of with the adaptive immune system. Despite the fact that...
So that's similar to... I've heard, I'm sure you've heard of him, Geert Vandenbosch. Is that the sort of like area that he's researching into?
It seems like
natural.
It seems like it, yes.
Okay.
Because he's been talking about not just interference, he's also been talking about natural killer cells that they could be collected to get this natural immunity-based vaccine. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe we could just combine the interference, type 1 and type 3. These are the most important types of interference that we could use with natural killer cells and even with adaptive T cells in some way. And we could treat these cells with interference because guess what? There's a natural immunity within adaptive immune components, which shows the foundation, the natural immune system is the foundation of all immunity. So you need to create this harmony between these two departments, this perfect harmony that we need to create to essentially help the human body prevail in the next hundreds of years against life-threatening illnesses.
So natural immunity and the innate immunity, is that the same thing?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So that's not non-specific to a particular virus or to a pathogen. That's like a basically something that is kind of like the first line of defense, right?
Yeah, that's what they say. It's non-specific, it's broad,
Okay.
So that's why I agree that we need to create a harmony between these two departments, innate and adaptive, and not just focus solely on the innate and forget about the adaptive. I'm not saying that. If people think I'm talking about this, then sadly they're not right, essentially.
Okay. And obviously, Geert mentioned that many times, and he has been censored quite heavily. And he's voiced his concerns many, many times that, if we keep doing like, what he called like, keep rolling out these what he called leaky vaccines, I mean, that can create a bigger problem than what we originally had, because the existing virus will evolve and will become a lot more dangerous. And I guess that's just, just the fact that he wasn't even allowed to like, presented to like any health authorities or even to like any like, I guess mainstream like, scientific journals or conferences. I mean, that brought us to kind of where we are now, where we have all these mutations of whatever it is that we have that are potentially a lot more dangerous, and for which like, the vaccines that we have or the injections that we have don't actually do anything. So I guess that leads me to like, the next topic, which is a very big topic and something I'm sure very close to your heart, and that's scientific censorship. I mean, I know that you've been censored yourself a couple of times. So I mean, what can we do to like, obviously, I mean, that censorship is very bad, and it's causing actual harm to people, especially during a pandemic. So what can we do to like, stop that censorship and ensure that there is always free flow of information between scientists, between academia and industry, between like, industry, like, with participants, to make sure that like, this information is freely exchanged and nobody can interfere with that? Like, how do you think we can achieve that?
So that's one thing I wanted to finish that point about Girvan Bush, because
Mhm.
what he discovered is actually the last straw of things, because this will essentially finally happen with all other viruses, with the leaky vaccines, that all these existing vaccines or all these models on which these existing vaccines were produced, they will all become leaky in the end, because all these viruses will learn to outcompete the immune system simply by hijacking the innate immune system and not deal with the adaptive. And now we can get to the topic of censorship. Censorship is crazy, like what's happening now. People are not allowed to speak the truth whatsoever. If there's any topic that I raise even on Instagram about HIV, well, now it's not that bad, but before, especially before, if I would say that, they'll either shut down my account or they warn me that do it 2 more times, you're gonna get your account shut.
Mm.
So there are certain keywords that are being recognized as being, part of uh, not allowed to speak on a social media that's supposed to be free and where there's supposed to be free speech.
Yeah.
So there's like trigger terms for the robots, because the robots are working to shut down free speech.
Yeah, I mean, look, algorithms on social media, I mean, that's obviously a problem, and it's a big problem. But I mean, I would say it's a much bigger problem, the fact that like, even proper scientific journals, I mean,
Yeah.
censor people. So that's a very big problem. And I think one of the things I think personally that I think very important for us to realize and discover as a result of what happened over the last couple of years is that we have several journals like that are very, very dominant in that field. And basically, like in vaccinology, I think there's like one or two or something like that. In medicine, there's obviously I think there's two, like, three medical journals that are basically the authority. And if all of those journals censor you or collude together to censor like a scientist, then either you can't get published anywhere else, or even if you can get published somewhere else, like nobody would take that seriously, I guess, in the establishment, because you weren't in one of the like, the reputable journals, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that creates a big problem and a very centralized kind of structure when it comes to scientific research. So I mean, what do you think we can do about it?
Well, the peer-reviewed industry is becoming more and more rigged, and I've seen myself journals like either asking authors to remove a paper, to retract a paper that's been initially peer-reviewed, or other ways. But that's the tricky part. I think the process of getting a paper peer-reviewed is a trap, because once you get it peer reviewed, like you said, You cannot publish it in another journal. That's it. And when you get it retracted, you can't do anything with it. And that's the topic that you mentioned everything. You mentioned everything in that, like every important aspect, every piece of information that resembles the truth. And once that is retracted, you cannot publish it anywhere else, apparently.
Okay, so that's important. I wasn't aware of that.
The truth.
Yeah, right. Okay.
You do reproduce it in different words, but the topic will have to be different as well. So that's why what I'm choosing to do myself is I'm getting a lot of preprints, because once I publish preprints, I can do anything I like with them. Even
so what does that mean? What does a preprint mean?
Preprint means a preliminary study, a study that has not been peer reviewed.
I see.
You publish that, it's online, people can see it. You put like 400 references, you're going to get a lot of reads. And essentially no one can control it because it's not peer reviewed. You could publish it any way you want at any time.
So how does it move then from being preprint to like actually making it to a journal? So like the journals will pick it up and then peer review it, or how does that?
You have to make sure that you speak the truth also one at a time. Because if you just spit everything out, then that could be contained in one piece, even newspaper, and say, oh, that's misinformation. We're going to cover everything mentioned there. So I would say speak the truth one at a time, one in each paper, in each preprint. And yeah, that's going to be the most important part, is get a preprint out there. And don't rush with journal publication. Look around, look what happened. If you had any retraction, if there was any retraction on a journal, maybe choose a different journal, because otherwise you might risk it yourself and it's not worth it, really.
Do you think maybe, and I don't know, but do you think maybe the journals, like the existence of the journals themselves is the problem? Because the way that you're describing that, in now, like, in the modern world, we can all, like, any scientist, any researcher can put a preprint out, right? And then people who are familiar with that topic, they can actually choose to like peer review that, like, without going to a journal. So it could be like a decentralized structure where, like, you put something about vaccinology, and this is like, I'm another researcher in vaccinology that is like doing similar topic around, like, say, for example, natural immunity. And I find your paper interesting, and I'm saying, okay, well, I'm going to review it as a professional and see what I think about it. And that kind of like, isn't that basically replicating the same process that would happen in a formal journal, but like, it doesn't, there's no publisher, there's no like someone that can say, okay, well, no, that can't be in the journal, even though it's true, even though it's like, sound science. I don't know, is something like, can something like that work?
Maybe I will not go as far as saying the journals are the problem. What the problem is in each journal, you've got infiltrators from, politicized science. In each journal, you might have like moderators that maybe at first are not active. They don't see that there's published something in there. But once they see it, they say, oh, that needs to be retracted. So... And maybe these moderators are like head editors, that they might not be active at that time because they're dealing with something else, So maybe it's just a system that is created, to create traps, because the system doesn't just not allow the truth to be spread. The system allows the truth to be spread, but then they create traps so they can absorb some important pieces of information, and then you can't do anything about it because you're being entrapped.
Yeah. Look, I think like with everything else, and I think we've seen it with pretty much every area that includes like, media, government, like, regulatory agencies. At the end of the day, you have to follow the money. And I don't know, maybe you can elaborate a little bit, but how do these journals, like, how do they fund themselves? Where do they get the money from?
Well, they get funded a lot of times from institutions like Public Health England or the CDC, or
Okay.
sometimes Bill Gates, like I've seen often journals, medical journals, papers being funded by Bill Gates.
Yeah, well, that is obviously a
He's not
problem.
even a doctor, and he's like funding, and people just listen. The man is not a doctor. You might consider him as being a nice man who cares about science, but his opinion should not be counted as a professional or a medical agent, because that's not right.
Yeah.
Even
Look,
myself,
I think
I'm just a scientist. I'm not a doctor. People should not take into account anything for themselves as if I'm giving advice, medical advice, because I'm not. I'm not competent for that. What I'm competent for is to report like scientific facts, and that's it. That's the job of a scientist, to analyze and report scientific data and facts.
all right. Okay. So I guess as the last question, kind of to close it off, I think that's a perfect question for that. So, like, as a scientist, I mean, obviously we have a major problem in the way that science currently operates, right? So there's a lot of commercial interest. There's regulatory. There's a lot of people that basically interfere with the pure and I guess classic work of science that results in some pretty big problems that are being created as a result of that. So, I mean, do you think that kind of scientists can come together and come up with some solutions to prevent that from happening and be able to do science in the more pure way, where follow the scientific method of okay, well, what is our theory, let's test it, and then we found something, and someone else validate it, and just make it purely about the science, completely take the politics out of it, so the people can actually start trusting science again? Because I think we have a very big problem with trust now. Many people don't trust the science because it almost been used like almost as almost like it's almost a curse word now, because constantly government told us during the pandemic, trust the science, follow the science, and eventually we found out that they've done anything but follow the science. So what do we do to fix that going forward?
Well, we have to become united as the independent researchers and scientists. And we do have to gather our thoughts together through conferences, through e-conferences, if not possible in location, or get together in other ways of events. But we do have to make brainstorming approaches, because I don't think that completely losing trust in the healthy part of science is right. That's where we have to separate the good from the bad, and if the independents and the ones in good practice, with good practice, they gather together and discuss ways of solution, either through academia, through publishing the truth, basically, or directly through laboratory research, through analyzing. For example, some researchers work in hospitals, they analyze patients' samples. So all these people working in research could just gather and even get some doctors in, and we could just talk about real solutions, like what we've been saying here with natural immunity-based treatment and immunization. And if we can find the right approaches here, that's when we can truly make a difference. But that's where the money comes. The money should come from the people. If we are united with at least 20% of the population, if not even 15%, let's say, 15% of the population is attentive to what we're saying, and they start funding all our efforts, and then the doctors will do this new treatment. We will talk about that new treatment. We will suggest maybe join together with other ways of treatment, make the new pieces of puzzle join together in different ways, in the best ways. And then eventually we might be able to create a treatment that will no longer cause harm even to one person in 1 million. Is it hard? It's tremendously hard, but it's worth it because life is about struggle. It's not about happiness. Oh, we need to be happy by nothing. No, life is about struggle. Life is about hustling, struggling, feeling like you're losing, but then getting up and fighting some more, obviously metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
And yeah, we should be united. Enough is enough. Like, there's a lot of harm happening to the children, with these spike protein vaccines, And now, like, there's another thing that I need to mention, like, because the number of early childhood vaccines is continuously increasing to 30, 40, this is going to also cause harm because although initially they say that there's no link between vaccines and autism, if there's the right immunization process, then you not only are not going to be completely unlikely from getting autism, you're going to have a healthy brain development, with no disruptions. But if you're going to continue to use classical ways, when the viruses evolve every day, you have to update vaccinology to the demands the viruses show. Otherwise, because you actually have a link between adaptive immunity and the brain and the neuronal system. And when you're going to excessively, repeatedly use vaccines in people in critical stages of brain development, because of that link between the immune system and the brain, you're actually going to favor the development of disruptions in brain development, in different regions of the brain, sub-regions even. And that's how autism is produced. Whether high functioning or low functioning, mostly high functioning, but if the high functioning increases significantly, exponentially, then the low functioning will also do it exponentially. It will reflect in a way. So this is not a joke. Like, first do no harm is a statement that should be respected, like, to the letter. Now we're completely losing the balance of medical and clinical discernment, and I think it's time to reassess everything and produce the solutions that are actually relevant to especially like to both the current state of microbial evolution and to the demands the human body have, like what needs to stimulate in the body and what does not need to stimulate in the body.
Yeah, here. Couldn't agree more. Look, I mean, I think, it's been a very good chat. I mean, I must say that I've learned a fair bit here as well about things that I didn't even, think that are even possible. So I think, look, I mean, my takeaway from all this discussion, and especially around like, censorship and cooperation with scientists is kind of like, it's the same thing as like with independent media. Everything has to be independent. So, you have science has to be independent, media has to be independent. Like, people have to be independent when it comes to their finances and not being controlled by the banks or, God forbid, like, CBDCs or things like that. And at the end of the day, that's the only way that we can get out of it. And then people need to understand that it's up to them for that to happen, because they are the ones that will have to, like, to make that happen, either by organizing or contributing money or, like, contributing efforts or whatever it takes. So, I mean, that the same applies to science as well. So thank you very much for that, Theo. It was really, really lovely chatting to you. And I think it'll be very beneficial for the audience, because I think we've covered quite a lot of quite complex things here that hopefully people can understand now, and that are a little bit more simple for them when they hear these things discussed. So thanks for coming on board, and talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me. Like, I hope that people understood what I said, because sometimes, I've covered information that is very complex, and I'm doing my best to try to get this translated into more simplistic terms.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely been useful, even for people who are not in that field, and help people understand a little bit more about what's happening with these things. So thanks for that.